Well, I just want to say welcome to everyone to the Chicago Archaeological Society. For those that are not familiar with us, we have been around for maybe 100 years. From oral tradition, I understand our group started back in the 1920s when the world was learning about the great discovery of King Tut's tomb, and ancient Egypt was influencing the style of Art Deco. Sometime after 1940, Harriet Smith, one of the first female archaeologists in the country, was involved in our group. She directed the first professional large-scale excavation of Cahokia Mounds in downstate Illinois. By at least 1962, the name the Chicago Archaeological Society was being used, and our mission to study the existence of man was established. Sometime after 1969, we became a chapter of the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology, the IAAA. At this point, the mission was further expanded to unite all persons interested in the archaeology of Illinois, amateurs, professionals, students, and educators. By at least 1987, we were a paper organization with the state of Illinois. And in short, like the IAAA, we focus on regional areas of archaeology, but in the pursuit of understanding all of mankind, we venture off into other areas such as the ancient America, Asia, Africa, all over the world. And hopefully, if you're not already a member, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting a notice that
I just got over COVID, so I'm a little bit stuffy still.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay. All right, hopefully things are working. All right. Still hear me, I hope. Yeah, all right. Sorry about that. Technical stuff's going on here. All right, so like my son is talking to me about Spider-Man here. One moment. Sorry about that. All right, so we hope that if you're not already a member, that you think about joining us and becoming a member of the Chicago Archaeological Society. And as a member of the Chicago Archaeological Society, you also become a member of the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology. As a member of our group and of the IAAA, you will help promote events like this, keep it going, and you get our monthly newsletter, the Codex, which has information about archaeology, anthropology, history, and as a member of the IAAA, you will get their Illinois Antiquity Magazine, and so they have some wonderful articles about what's being done in the state of Illinois. So if you'd like to find out more, please go to chicagoarchaeologicalsociety.com. If you got questions, you can email us at info@chicagoarchaeology.org.
Ray,
Yes.
May I interject for a second that
Yes, please.
on the chicagoarchaeologicalsociety.com, I am quite sure that the credit card pay link is now open
Wonderful.
and functioning, so that at the very near the top, there's that menu across which has home and calendar and events. And so click on the join and donate there, and that should take you to the credit card option.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, for years, we've only been taking checks, and now we can actually take online payments. Thank you, Anne. So we hope that you like what you see today and want to see more and become a supporting member. And I thank you to our existing members, because without you, we wouldn't have this. And it's been a long run, almost 100 years of meetings, society, events, talks. So thank you. All right. And want to mention that last month we had a great talk from Dr. Gregory and Dr. Peterson on the Chicago neighborhood of Bronzeville. That was very fascinating to hear about stuff in our own backyard. Now, next month, it's going to be Dr. Vincent Lamota of University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm going to butcher this name, Homolovia site in the ancient Southwest. Now, I'd like to see an informal poll here of how many people are interested in actually meeting in person again. So doing a hybrid event is what we're proposing. So we would still stream to Zoom, but we would have the opportunity of meeting together at the Evanston Public Library, where we used to meet before COVID. So are people able to raise their hands via such things? Yeah, see some hands going up, or actually there even is a little hand icon. So it looks like, yeah, it looks like there's interest in meeting again. So next month, online and in person at the Evanston Public Library, that will be April 24th at 3:30. Looking forward to seeing you all again in person for the first time in over 2 years. So that's really something. All right, but today we have the honor of having Daniela Raillard Arias. And let me tell you a little bit about her. She is from Northwestern University and will speak today about the above ground mortuary architecture in Chachapoya's region, Peru. She holds multiple degrees in anthropology, archaeology, and Latin American studies. At Northwestern, she earned a MA and is a PhD candidate in anthropology. She earned an honors BA with high distinction from the University of Toronto. She specializes in pre-colonial cultures and histories of South American Andes. She manages several online platforms to engage the public in Chachapoya archaeology and Andean histories on Facebook, TikTok. Her personal website, Daniela Raillard Arias.com, and her dissertation page at Chachapoya.com, and you can see the links there, I hope, when sharing my screen. So please visit those sites to learn more. This lecture will contextualize the history and current challenges to studying above ground mortuary structures in the Chachapoya region, such as the legacy of Euro-American explorers, local community annexes, and tourism development. So please, everyone, welcome soon to be Dr. Raillard Arias.
Soon to be, I like that. Thank you so much for that introduction.
Here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can share yours.
Great. Okay, let's do that. Okay, and everyone can see the PowerPoint, I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
Let me pull up my notes here and let me hide you all. Just if there's any issues, just feel free to interrupt me. I'm just hiding the video, so I won't be able to actually see if someone's trying to get my attention. So just interrupt me if anything is lagging or something like that with the PowerPoint. Great. Well, thank you everyone for this invitation to join you today. So first of all, on my slide here, if you would like, you can actually scan the QR code in the corner, and that will link you to my website if you are interested in learning more about myself or about my research and my other projects. And I'll have a QR code at the end of the slide, at the end of the presentation as well, for you to check out. Great, so before we begin, I want to, here we go. There we go. Recognize that Chicago is located on the traditional homelands of the people of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, Odawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. It's also the site of trade, travel, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other Native tribes, and it continues to be the home for urban Indigenous folks and tribal members throughout the state of Illinois. I'm also speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe in what is known as so-called Canada today. And this research was conducted within the ancestral lands of Indigenous Andean communities, including the Chachapoya, Chilcho, Luya, Timpoy, Jamach, and Chibun. It is early August 2018, and the ichu grass on the terrace slopes of Peru's northeastern highlands has turned a deep golden yellow with hues of green. The wind rustles the dry grass and the sun offers some warmth to make up for the frosty clear nights of the Halka, the ecological zone at over 3,000 meters above sea level. I am standing with my partner Guidmar and his family, who are all trained Peruvian archaeology assistants and tourism guides. We had just finished refilling excavation units for a previous project, and we decided to take the long way around the mountain before descending to the Pampa, the valley bottom, where we were to stay for the night in a farmhouse. This route would bring us to the 2 lookouts above a seasonal river that's dried up at this time of year, that runs along the bottom between a mountain slope and a vertical limestone cliff face on the opposite side. So you can see that cliff face right here. We are taking turns using my small binoculars to look at the ancient Chachapoya funerary structures nestled in these cliffs across from us, and you can just make them out here. My brother-in-law, Emmanuel, turns to me and he asks how people were able to build such structures so high up in the vertical rock face. And he jokes that as an archaeologist, it's my job to provide an answer. These are the types of questions that began to inform my research. Emmanuel's question is one of several from local community members in the Chachapoya region that inquires into the spatial design, access, and construction of these mortuary complexes. Since 2016, I have been collaborating with local guides to document and study above-ground mortuary architecture in the Chachapoya region within northeastern Peru. I first arrived in the town of Leimebamba to assist with excavations of residential sites in the Tambillo Valley through an opportunity to work with Dr. Anna Gwengerich on her project. I had previously learned of Chachapoya mortuary architecture in these cliff faces from an undergraduate course in Andean archaeology.
Ron, what time do you think you'd like to eat? 4?
This was a subject that I was drawn to because of my interest in learning about my maternal Colombian heritage and Andean histories more broadly. However, only once I began to spend time with local guides walking across this landscape of mountain cloud forest did I begin to realize that and experience the pervasiveness and the diversity of mortuary architecture. So the most famous of these sites are the mausoleums of Laguna de los Condores, which you might have heard about before. These were originally identified in 1996 by local rancher assistants. 7 mausoleums were excavated as part of a salvage archaeology project in 1997, and this was done by a team of Peruvian national and foreign researchers, as well as local authorities and assistants from Leimebamba. 219 mummy bundles and thousands of funerary objects were recovered, and ultimately they were stored 42 kilometers away in Leimebamba within the facilities of a community museum that was opened in 2000. Los Pinchudos is another of these more well-known mortuary sites, and similar to Laguna de los Condores, you can see here the mausoleum that's in a limestone cliff face. This was excavated in the 1980s, and there are several mausoleums at the site. It's most well known for these wooden carvings that hang outside one of the mausoleums. There's also the mausolea of Rebash, which are renowned for the colorful painted plastered walls, angled roofs, and differently shaped niches. And similarly constructed also in limestone cliff faces, we have the sarcophagi, such as the Carajilla sarcophagi. So the Carajilla sarcophagi are known for these, specifically these 6 remaining structures that are made from clay reeds, and they're painted with red and yellow and white pigments. And in recent years, there is also significant attention being placed on the site of La Petaca, the La Petaca Mortuary Complex, which contains hundreds of mausolea, platforms, and walls, which are a little bit difficult to make out here, but they're all along the bottom as well. And I believe one of the archaeologists who participated on the project is joining us here as well. So it'll be exciting to hear if he has anything to say and add to this. And near La Petaca, we also have Diablo Huasi in a similar limestone cliff face. And this also contains several mausoleums and cliff burials, as you can see. And this picture was taken with our drone in 2019. So these are examples of the most renowned Chachapoya mortuary sites, but local communities have known of dozens more throughout Amazonas, San Martin, and La Libertad departments. That's the area that encompasses what is approximately the territory of the Chachapoya culture. With the assistance of local collaborators, I have begun to compile a database for Chachapoya mortuary sites using both field surveys and bibliographic research that's built on the work of previous archaeologists. So far, the database contains over 100 sites, and they're represented on the map here by the black triangles. These sites span what is now defined as the Chachapoya territory. So this is located in northeastern Peru. It's right at the border between, it's the zone that's between the Andean highlands and the Amazonian lowlands. So because of this vertical transition from mountains to rainforest, the region has quite a few different ecological zones, like the mountain cloud forest. And you can see this in the picture on the screen, where we have this more highland grasslands, and as you are descending lower down eastward towards the Amazon, you get more and more rainforest. The region is bordered by the Marañón River to the west, and what is now known today as the Rio Apiseo National Park to the south, and the Huallaga River to the southeast, and to the north is bordered by the Awajún and Wampis territories. So this is the region that's approximately referred to as the territory of the Chachapoya culture. However, the term Chachapoya actually refers to several different indigenous Andean communities whose cultural traditions date back to at least 900 Common Era. So this is about 1,200 years ago. These communities include the Chijao, the Chilcho, the Luya, the Lamud, Timpuy, Ampuy, Chibul, and Jamach, among others. They share, They share, here we go. They share some similar cultural traditions, such as circular houses that are built with platform bases. These ones often have friezes as well, as you can see with this kokos design, textile technologies, and ceramic styles. And with regards to settlement patterns, Chachapoya sites are also widely understood to be built on mountaintops. However, Inca imperial expansion in the 1470s likely grouped these different communities into a single province, and then that was named the Chachapoya province. Later Spanish invaders of the 16th century continued to lump together these different ethnic groups of the northeastern highlands, and this further obscured the histories and diversity of these people. Oral histories, genetic studies, and archaeology all show, though, that there's significant diversity in the people and cultural practices of what is referred to as Chachapoya. So for this reason, when we are talking about the Chachapoya or referring to the term Chachapoya, we must keep in mind that these are actually quite a few different communities that did share some similar cultural practices. So above ground mortuary architecture is one form of material culture that can provide some insight into the Chachapoya past. These mortuary sites, however, they're not just relics of the past, they do have a profound presence today. And to study these sites, we must be aware of the historical and current context. Oh, sorry about that. Of the over 100 documented Chachapoya mortuary sites, less than 10% have been dated so far. So even the approximately 7 sites that we do have dates for, they mostly come from artifacts and not from the actual structures. So this creates some pretty big gaps in the time frame and what we can understand to be as the use period for these sites and when they were constructed. With the few dates that we do have, however, it shows that these places were used for a long period of time. The earliest dates come from around 800, 900 CE from La Petaca, and then this extends all the way into the colonial period. Some sites were finally appropriated by the Inca as well, so they were used during the Inca period, and we do find some artifacts from the colonial period. For example, at Laguna de los Condores, they found a crucifix. So this shows a long period of use of these mortuary sites. Within these structures, different forms of burial were practiced. Overall, there's an emphasis on a collective burial system. So these community members were placed together within these structures, and bioarchaeology has showed that both children, adolescents, adults, and seniors, they were all interred together, sometimes as mummy bundles and sometimes as skeletal bundles. These bundles were wrapped with vegetal cord and textiles, and they were placed alongside with pottery, wood carvings, gourd vessels, food items, among other offerings. There's also strong evidence that these places were revisited over time. So community members were coming back to bring offerings, and this is demonstrated by both radiocarbon dates that show multiple use periods of these sites, and also in the spatial patterns and the architecture. So for example, here on the screen, you'll see one of the stones for the accessway of one of the sites. And if you look close, you can see it's fairly polished and smoothed down. And this likely happened from people moving in and out over time out of these places. So Chachapoya mortuary sites continue to hold meaning for people today. For some locals, these places can cause significant anxiety and fear. So visiting these archaeological sites and disturbing them could create a risk of catching antimonio or mal aire, which manifests as a sickness or as a disease, an infection, or a general uneasiness of the body. For some local people also, these sites they provoke curiosity, and there's a lot of interest with connecting with the past. Regardless of the type of relationship people have with this site, they are places that require and demand a lot of respect. So local people and visitors alike ensure this respect by bringing offerings of coca leaves and tobacco. So you can see that here, this is at the base of a site that's called San Jeronimo, and we have all these fresh coca leaves, and some of them have been there for a while, and a little cigarillo butt, which has tobacco. These offerings, especially like coca leaf, have a long history of sacred importance and use in the Andes, and they serve to protect the visitor and also facilitate connections with the past. So because these places contain the bodies of past Indigenous and Indian people, it's very important to be respectful and be aware and sensitive when you are visiting these sites and studying these sites in order to minimize disturbance. And you can also be respectful by bringing offerings. Unfortunately, though, most, if not all, of these mortuary sites have been severely damaged and disturbed over the years. So this happened from both environmental processes and the looting that came with the Spanish colonization. So the Spanish initiated these looting practices. The location of many of these sites are in cliff faces, so it makes them vulnerable to earthquakes. But there are some theories that are pointing to the construction that the Chachapoya people actually constructed some of their sites within overhangs and in protected spaces that would have allowed the preservation of these sites from rain that's super powerful in this area. So people and animals have also impacted these sites. The one shown here, this one was used for cattle for them to find shelter for cows. And some of the places also have been written on and vandalized. Another issue comes up when studying these mortuary sites is the impact of 19th and 20th century foreign travelers to the Chachapoya region who were in search of archaeological sites and materials. So Jean Savoy is one of these figures. He's pictured here, and he was a Euro-American traveler without archaeological training who is notorious for his trips to the Chachapoya archaeological sites. Even today, local Peruvian community members, they still describe his mule trains that were packed with looted artifacts, and people in the town of Lemebamba eventually managed to kick him out, and they prevented him from continuing his activities. Unfortunately, Savoy is not the only one of these figures, and even in the last few decades, European and Euro-American travelers continued to conduct controversial visits to these sites. And this unfortunately has created lasting tensions between local communities and archaeological research because local people are trying to protect their heritage. The issue of heritage and access to these sites is further complicated by tourism. So we were talking about this a little bit before we started the presentation today, and there's quite a lot of tourism development that has been occurring in the last 2 decades in the Chachapoya region. The mortuary sites that I showed to you in the beginning are some of the most popular tourist attractions, but they've also got a lot more attention since 2017, when a cable car was opened to go to Puela. So even more tourists are now flocking to this region. Rural community tourism organizations are working to manage interest in these sites, and this increased tourist attention to these mortuary sites requires that archaeologists engage with a broader public. So we have to be aware when we're doing this archaeological research that we're not only engaging with local community members and other archaeologists, but in the long run, tourists are also going to be consuming and reading these archaeological studies through their visits to these sites. And finally, and most importantly, when it comes to studying these mortuary sites, we also must be aware of the local community interests. So this is an example here. In 2019, a group of high school students created replicas of mortuary structures, such as this mausoleum and the sarcophagi. And they did this for the annual Raimi Pampa Festival that's hosted in July in Lemebamba. So like Emmanuel's question, local people are fascinated by the Chachapoya past, and they are dedicated to maintaining and reviving their cultural heritage. So they have big stakes in what kind of research is being done with these mortuary sites. So in working with local communities, I have learned about these different factors that impact the study of mortuary sites. There's the ethics of studying sacred sites and dealing with indigenous bodies, the structural vulnerability of these sites because of environmental damage, looting damage, the legacy of pseudo-archaeology, an increase in tourism attention, and also, of course, the local community interest. And all of these factors create challenges, but also opportunities when we're studying above ground mortuary architecture in the Chachapoya region. So for this reason, in my work, I apply a minimally invasive approach to studying these sites. In 2018 and 2019, I conducted pilot studies in collaboration with the local guides, and we used participatory mapping, a handheld global positioning system to document this mortuary architecture through over a dozen field surveys. Participatory mapping uses the land-based knowledge of local guides, such as Erin Chavez Chancawana, who's shown here, to identify mortuary structures and also map the broader ecological and archaeological landscape. Then in 2019, we ran a pilot project that used aerial drone survey to study these sites that are located in cliff faces and more difficult to reach locations. We surveyed 6 mortuary complexes by flying the drone in vertical and horizontal transects. So I just did a little diagram here. It's not exactly how it was flown, but as you can see here, we were following kind of like first flying horizontally and then going up and down as well. And as we're flying, every couple seconds or every second or so, we are taking a picture with the drone that's pointed directly to these cliff faces. So this allows us to collect sometimes dozens, even 100, 200 pictures, depending on the size of the cliff face. And with these pictures, we can then stitch them together in a software to create a 3D model of the vertical cliff face. And that allows us to study the architecture, spatial patterns, and access ways of these mortuary sites. So through this approach, we're able to understand this relationship and study the relationship of these mortuary sites with the broader landscape without actually having to get to these places, especially when they're difficult to get to and there's the issue of preservation. These surveys revealed significant presence of the mortuary sites across the landscape and a huge diversity of these places. So I'm going to talk to you in the next couple slides about the diversity, and I'll just show you some of the pictures of these different places. So for example, here, this is the site of Guayabamba, and Vira Vira is the name of the archaeological site that's nearby. It's similar to Laguna de los Condores. As you can see here, there's a huge highland lake. And then in the cliff faces overlooking the lake, over here is where we have several cliff mausolea, and there are a couple more over here as well. But we were only able to reach the ones that are over this end of the lake. So even just within this one site, we have different types of structures. We have this mausoleum that's high up in the cliff face. And actually there was a previous work being done here, and you can even make out the leftover nails from the climbers that climbed up into the site. And then on this end, we have a different kind of structure, which is at the entrance of a cave or like a cliff overhang kind of cave. And this probably was a lot more built up previously, but over time and with looting, it got destroyed. It's just kind of this retaining wall that's at the entrance of this cave. So at least 2 different kinds of structures in this one site. We also have this, we also checked out the site of Papamarca, or also called Timbambo. And this is where Timpuy communities built at least 4 burial towers on this mountain slope. And you can see here it's surrounded by terraced fields, and there's also residential sites nearby, so the households of people. And up close, this is one of the burial towers. It would have been maybe 2 stories, and up here would have been one of the entrances or the access ways. Similar to Papamarca, we have the site of Chivani, which has several burial towers as well. And these are located, there's a lake nearby that's not as visible, but we have a residential site up here with lots of households, Chachapoya households, and some terraces around these towers as well. And this is a close-up of one of these burial towers. So kind of similar to Papamarca, we have, but this one is a bit more intact. So this is, you can see the access way, and this is the platform base. And in this case, this burial tower still has an intact roof. Very close by to Chivani, just like 20 minutes away, we have another site that's also, that this one instead is in a cliff face. So we had the Chivani, which are burial towers that are freestanding on the mountain slope. And then we have Los Estribos, which is built into a limestone cliff face. And if we look up close, this is the most intact structure. The rest are pretty disturbed and destroyed at this point. But in this case, this one is 2 stories and has multiple access ways. You can see the top one here, and then 2 rows of zigzag friezes. At the site of San Jeronimo, this is one of the more fascinating sites because we also have several different types of burial architecture, funerary architecture. So this is a limestone cliff face over here, and there are several groups of funerary architecture. We get up close. One of the groups is this group of sarcophagi. So similar to Carajillo, which I showed you before, we have these clay and reed sarcophagi with faces, and some of them even have 2 heads. This one has 1 head, this one has 2 heads, and inside would have been placed 1 or 2 bundles, burial bundles. Now, at the same site of San Jeronimo, we have chulpas or mausoleums. So early on, it was understood that in the north of the Chachapoya region, we would have sarcophagi, similar to these ones shown here. And then in the south and central of the region, there would be more mausoleums and burial towers. But this is not the case at San Jeronimo. So at a single site, we have not 1, not 2, but actually 3 different types of mortuary architecture. So you can see here, quite destroyed, but these are mausoleums. And then in another, over here in the corner is actually a cave burial as well. So we have a cave burial, we have mausoleums, and we have sarcophagi all at a single site. So this definitely complicates this idea, this distribution of mortuary architecture in the Chachapoya region. So the Chachapoya region is most known for the cliff mausoleums. So this is another example here, the site of Parajillo or San Cristobal, which is overlooking Leimebamba. You can't see much from here, but we were able to fly the drone fairly close and identify quite a few mausoleums as well. So we have one, you can see here is pretty prominent. There's the access way and 2 T-shaped niches that are still present. And then up here, looks like there was another structure. And within these little caves or these little holes in the cliff face, there would have also been structures, and there's probably more structures down here in this little outcrop. The site of Saltet Si Puedes is also a limestone cliff burial. It's located along a modern road, but also this road follows a pre-colonial, pre-Hispanic road system. Again, it's hard to make out from a distance, but if we go closely, we can see quite an elaborate mausoleum. So this mausoleum is actually several different structures that are all built next to each other, abutting, with sharing the same construction phase. And there's, as you can see, several access ways. Up here on this multi-story structure, there would have been at least 1, 2, 3, 4. I think there's even a 5th entrance as well. And you can just make out kind of this red pigment. This was probably painted or plastered, but now it's come off over time. And we can make out here several rows of this frieze design. This is called a checkerboard frieze. And it's shared with another site that I'll show to you in a second. So this is the site of Salte Si Puedes, and you can actually walk up to the site. It's a limestone cliff face, but it's just at the base of the cliff. The site of Peña Seca is very similar to Salte Si Puedes in some of the designs. So again, hard to make out, but with the drone, we were able to get closer and we were able to identify at least one structure. It's possible there are more. And we can see there's a wooden beam and the same kind of checkerboard frieze as Salte Si Puedes. And one of the final examples that I'll show to you today is the site of Osiris. So this is more to the east of the Chachapoya, in the Chachapoya region. So it's more towards the Amazon, the lower lands, where the rainforest is. You can't see much when you're walking on the red paint. But if you zoom in, you're able to make out very distinct rock art paintings in the background with this red, and a wooden platform which contains artifacts and remains on top of it as well. So this is a slightly different structure. It's not, at least at this point of time, in its state as it is, it's not a complete mausoleum, but it is a mortuary site with this wooden platform. And just to really get across my point here, that I showed you a lot of these pictures of sites that are still fairly intact and in an okay shape, but these mortuary sites are actually located just across the entire landscape. So you'll find in rock outcrops, cave systems, underhangs as well, these structures. So you can see here a very simple one that's left behind, and you can just make out this retaining wall, and inside there would be a few remains left. So even though quite a few of them have been destroyed, there's oftentimes just enough wall left that you can figure out that this was a mortuary site. And these are located just across the landscape in many different rock outcrops. So to begin to study some of these sites, we've conducted a few geospatial analysis to reveal some of these patterns of the sites in the landscape. For example, in the case of Peña del Gallo, so this is a mortuary site that's located up here in this cave. It's actually right next to a pre-colonial road system. So this is just the remains of the road, and you can see that there would have been these stone steps here, and this goes just along the base. So actually from this, where this picture is taken from, I'm taking it from the road, so you can look right up into the tomb, into the mortuary site. So I used least cost path analysis using ArcGIS, which is a geospatial analysis program. And this allows me to study the relationships between landscape features like this road system and these mortuary sites. So it's possible we're starting to see patterns where these sites are placed and constructed, that they were constructed along road networks and places where people were moving. They might have been transported with llama caravans, and along the way they would have come across these sacred sites, which are very powerful places. Another example of geospatial analysis that helps us begin to understand the relationships of these sites with the broader landscape is a visibility or a viewshed analysis. So a viewshed analysis basically identifies the area that's visible from a particular point. So in this case, if we would be standing at this burial tower, we can analyze, okay, what area is visible? What can you see from this burial tower from this particular point, or maybe from down here from a residential site? And using this viewshed analysis, I was able to determine that sites like with this burial tower, they are very visible from residential sites, so where people are living, and also from agricultural terraces. So people in the past, Chachapoya people in the past, as they're going about their daily activities in their houses or working the land, engaging in agriculture, they would often be able to see and actually visibly interact with these burial towers, with these mortuary sites. And this, no doubt, would have had a very powerful impact on their daily lives and on their understanding of their ancestors and their relationships with their dead. So I also did viewshed analysis with cliff face tombs. And in this case, we have kind of the opposite is happening. You can see here, this is the Parahijo site that I showed you earlier, and this is one of the structures that's in the cliff face. But in the case of this site, the mausoleums, the mortuary sites are not visible from Congona, Cataneo, which are the archaeological sites. So in this case, people living in their households at these archaeological sites would not have been able to see on an everyday basis these cliff mausolea from their houses. Instead, their sites are built on top of the mountain, and in order to visit and place their dead, they would have come down to the cliffs below. So we're seeing these different kinds of spatial patterns that are occurring between burial towers, cliff mausolea, and other kinds of structures. It's not quite clear yet what these patterns, if there's frequency and these patterns are reoccurring. So that'll happen with more and more of my dissertation analysis, but we're starting to see these different styles of relating to the dead across the landscape. So I'm just going to conclude my talk today with a couple key takeaways. If you take anything away from this talk, I just want to emphasize how important it is to involve local independent community members in archaeological research. So local community interests and knowledge and their concerns are very important to integrate into the archaeological research design. And this can actually shape the way that we do archaeology. And in this case, using a minimally invasive approach, using drone technology, participatory mapping, GPS, geospatial analysis. And this all came from the impact and involvement of local community members and their interest in studying these sites. The other key takeaway is to show how spatially ubiquitous these sites are and how diverse they are. So when we talk about Chachapoya mortuary architecture, we're really talking about a whole slew of different types of styles and construction techniques and positions in the landscape. And finally, as I pointed out earlier on in the presentation, these places were used for centuries, since at least 800 CE, 900 CE, and well into the colonial period. And as I talked about in the beginning, they're still important sites for local communities and descendant communities today, and for visitors, foreign visitors, tourists, national tourists alike. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to the Chicago Archaeological Society for this invitation. It was a pleasure to join you all today and share a little bit about my work. Thank you to my partner and also to the local collaborators who helped make this project happen. And I am happy to answer any questions that you may have and chat about this work and share a little bit more. And you can also scan the QR code on the screen here. If you do have any questions and want to follow up with me via email, this QR code brings you to a contact form, or you can just email me using the email on the screen as well. And the QR code also brings you to my website if you are interested in learning more and following my research process. So thank you again, and I will stop. I'll leave my screen up for now, and then if we need to, I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Daniela. This has been very, very exciting for me because, you know, I feel so personally connected to the area because of my wife and I journey there. What a fantastic place to work and research. Anyone that would like to ask questions at this time, you're welcome to unmute yourself. And if you don't feel comfortable talking, you could put your questions in the chat and I'll be glad to read it for you. So there's a museum in the area, and I believe there was a protest by the local people saying, you can't take these mummies away, you can't ship them off to Lima. We need them here, we need them in the community, we need the tourism. Do you know which museum I'm talking about?
You might be referring to the Lima Community Museum. And,
yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the museum where I mentioned at the beginning, where they house the 219 mummy bundles. Mm-hmm. And they have some really great facilities that they were able to establish that neutralizes the impacts of the climate on the mummy bundles. And it is true that people in Lemebamba and throughout the Chachapoya region, they're very definitive and very powerful when it comes to dealing with their material culture and their heritage. So there has been cases where some mummies have been sent around the world to travel to other museums, and it's always a little bit of a tense issue because they are very keen and fixed on keeping their culture there. And it is important because the museum itself has become such a big attraction, and it's really increased the tourism presence. And it really does a great job at explaining the Chachapoya history and bringing people to the community where, you can eat at the local restaurants, stay at the hotels, and this brings, funding to the community as well. So there has been some issues, and I think there's been previously looted mummy bundles like from other sites that have turned up in other museums. So there's one in Musée de l'Homme in Paris, the Museum of Man in Paris. There's a mummy bundle or mummies from La Pitaca, I believe. And there's been some talk, I think, there about maybe repatriating and bringing it back to Lemebamba as well. Yeah, thank you for that starting off question. Happy to take any other questions.
So I have a question. What software do you use to stitch together the 3D models from the drone photography?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was using AGSoft PhotoScan. I can type it in the chat. And this was just one that I got access to through my university, through a class that I was taking. So sometimes it can be a little bit expensive to access this stuff. But I'm happy to talk more individually if about different programs. So this is the one I use. Yeah.
I have a question. Okay, I guess I'll go. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Daniela. That was an amazing presentation, and it's really exciting to hear about your work. I'm currently running sort of a similar project in the Urubamba Valley near Cusco. So my project specifically is based around registering architecture, terraces, and tombs. So also trying to look at how some of these built remains relate to each other in the landscape, looking at the LIP and the Inca period. And I was really curious about what you were talking about in terms of the diversity of different kinds of mortuary structures in the Chachapoya region, because I've been seeing sort of a similar situation where you have tomb structures that seem to be very different from each other, that seem to have probably facilitated kind of different ways of interacting with the dead. And so I've been trying to kind of grapple with, what does this mean? Does this mean that there's sort of different cultural groups living alongside each other? Or is this more indicative of kind of change over time? So I'd like to just hear a little bit more of your thoughts of how you're kind of thinking about what do these different kinds of mortuary structures mean? Is it chronological? Is it cultural? Yeah, if you could just talk a little bit more about that, I'd be really curious to hear. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's really cool. I hope we can stay in touch to exchange research ideas and chat more, because it seems like there's a lot of overlap between our projects. 100%, it's definitely a complicated situation with trying to figure out what is exactly happening. I have a couple theories, and this builds off the work of previous researchers as well. So there's the issue of time, and as I pointed out, these have long temporality as well. So in the timeline it provided, we can see that some of them extend maybe into what we know as the middle horizon. Usually people, when they refer to tulpas, people think of it, the late intermediate period, which is around 1000 CE up until the Inca expansion. But then they were, of course, used still into the Inca period and then appropriated by the Inca, and then well into the colonial period. So it's possible we're seeing a change over time. The time question will only really become more clear as we get more dates. And it is part of my intent for my dissertation work is to date some more sites. Unfortunately, with the pandemic and everything, I haven't been able to go back and do the bulk of my dissertation research. But I am hoping that I'll be able to go and at least procure some dates from the actual structures themselves, so we have an idea of when they were constructed instead of just when they were used. so when the initial construction happened. The other theory that could be happening is that these are like different cultures or different communities. I think that's maybe what I'm leaning more towards, is that especially with we're seeing with the oral history evidence, the biological evidence as well, is that these are different communities expressing their relationships with their dead in different ways. So even though the concept, overall is that they're above ground sites, we're seeing so much diversity in how that's happening. And I think it's a really cool idea to think that each community is, taking these techniques and this knowledge and these relationships into their own hands and expressing it slightly differently. So it's possible maybe at sites like San Jeronimo, maybe that was a change over time, or maybe it was different members of the community. And that brings me to maybe the third theory, is that it could also maybe be a status thing, which people have theorized before, that people with more status are getting the sarcophagi and individual burials, or people, and then more community levels, people are being mixed together. And I think archaeological research might give more insight into that when you're looking at like isotopic remains and like people's food consumption habits as well, and seeing if there's one thing is that the research of Marla Toyn showed that from a different site at Los Pinchudos, is that she did an isotopic analysis, and it showed that there was both people who may have were consuming water and for local from the region were buried, also with people who were from outside the region, which could have possibly been Inca invaders, and they were actually buried together. So that complicates things even further, showing that maybe status might not even be an issue. It was still emphasis on collective. So those are a couple of theories, and I'm just hoping now that I will be able to do some of my dissertation research and shine some more light by getting at least some more dates on the construction events, and that will maybe rule out some of the factors with time. And if this is all happening at the same time, it's possible maybe the towers, are similar to burial towers in other contexts as well. And I even have a couple pictures here of, this is in a different region, like this is in the Huánuco region, like hundreds of kilometers south of Chachapoyas. And it's pretty much the same limestone cliff faces with tulpas, with mausoleums. And these are burial towers in the Huánuco region. And they have similar zigzag friezes and the T-shaped niches as the Chachapoyas. So even like this idea of, like I was saying before, Chachapoyas being a fixed territory, fixed area, it's pretty clear these communities are exchanging knowledge systems about and burial systems across the Andes, as you're noticing in your region as well. So thank you, Julia, for your question. Next.
Oh, we have a question from Armando.
Hey. Yeah. Hey, Daniela, how's it going?
Good. So Armando is the person I was referencing, has worked at La Pitaca and does bioarchaeology there.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that you're talking about dates, and we've got some dates on chulpas at La Pitaca that can be as early as 800 or 900 on a chulpa. So we do have chulpas in the middle horizon there. But the thing I was going to ask is, I love the idea of minimally invasive work. I thank you for the presentation. It was awesome, and I love the use of photogrammetry that you're doing here. But so there's obviously the thing that you're talking about, which is like dates, getting dates from this. How do we manage to still be minimally invasive while still being able to kind of get these dates and maybe look at, the same thing, isotopic analysis or some of the other data that is inherently invasive, while still kind of managing the fact that these are sacred sites that are still kind of, we're trying to protect them along with the community.
Yeah, 100%. And I know this is a question that's probably very, that you're grappling with a lot as well. And there's definitely this tension trying to find that medium between, what you can do with being minimally invasive, but also, the data that you need to collect or could be of interest to local communities, but would require some more excavation or recovering remains as well. I think first and foremost, I think it doesn't rule out being able to, collect this data and work with stuff as long as there's the proper community consultation. And I've also seen from experience too, I think it's like maybe one way to think about it is if materials do need to be recovered for scientific analysis, that then once that's done, they come back and are repatriated to the community, and it can either be held at the museum or reburied or whatever. So there's different ways to move around that. With regards to dates, so I have been thinking about that, how to find that minimally invasive aspect, but also still recover materials. So what I've been looking at is potentially taking small samples of and I don't have a picture of it here, but a lot of the sites, as you know, have they have masonry, and then in between we have a little bit of clay layer that's often mixed with highland grasses, botanical material. So that stuff can be dated with radiocarbon. I think even on your project you did that as well. And so in the cases of sites that have been disturbed or are destroyed, there are, like with those estribos and stuff like that, you're able to probably recover small pieces that's already maybe on the ground or just on the edge, or that's already exposed from destruction, without actually having to excavate. And you can actually just date the structure without actually digging anything up. The other thing, and you've noticed this as well, is that, and I haven't mentioned it here, but a lot of these sites also use wood to build the structures. And there's a lot of wood left behind, and a lot of the beams and stuff are exposed. Unfortunately, because of Spanish colonization, a big part of it was that they people would go in and then burn the sites as well. So some of the sites have evidence of burning inside of the structures as well. But then that further exposes wood. And so we're looking into maybe using radiocarbonates of this wood, and also maybe at the end of the day could do some tree ring dating as well. But that's you know, a long ways away, because you need to have samples from other contexts as well. So I hope that gives some insight into that issue. And I think as long as, you know, with putting community consultation to the forefront and thinking about innovative ideas of repatriating, and, you know, if you do need to handle with the artifacts or the bodies or bones, then bringing it back. And also just transparency, I think at the end of the day, is the most important thing, and engaging with publics, because I, at least from conversation, people are really interested in the stuff, right? And as you know, like, people do want to learn more about the history and their heritage. It's just that there's been so much trauma there from previous, from colonization and from previous work and pseudo archaeology, that we have to just make sure we're transparent and with our work. So thank you, Armando, for giving me space to talk about that a little bit more. And we'll have to connect again for sure. Cool. Next question.
Yeah, we have a question from Dr. Dale.
Thank you so much for this outstanding chat. One of the themes that I've noticed in a lot of our presentations for the CAS has been the integration of multiple data sets. You know, and one thing that we've also talked about is always including that local community component. So I see that your project checks a lot of boxes about great integration of multiple data sets, the local community and their voice being represented. And you can tell you have a genuine passion for this. So I really congratulate you for bringing this great package together. So for my master's, I worked on Easter Island and did a lot of viewshed analysis from the statues, looking at a variety of sort of habitational and ceremonial sites in the landscape. And sure enough, some 90% of the time, all of these are within the viewscape of these big statues looking inland at all the ancestors. And I think that it's amazing that where you have these big viewscapes, visual scapes, political landscapes, you know, there's a message of also the elite. And they're very much documenting this sort of political landscape. So I was sort of curious, you had mentioned you did sort of 2 studies with the least cost pathway and viewshed. Have you linked all of that together to see a more macro pattern, to see if these sites then are being linked into each other by these roadways? How much visibility, you know, we know visibility is 2 ways. It's looking up at the site, but then the site looking down. So how is that being linked into more, because you're saying, you know, the political boundaries today aren't really relevant. You know, groups today have a different way to organize territories. How can we discuss more macro patterns of the landscape, and especially addressing later Inca roads and so forth? I'm sort of interested in that. Thank you very much.
Yes, excellent question. And thank you so much for that. Yeah, so the first big issue is that obviously when we're doing these geospatial analysis, it's just like right now is just the sheer lack of data and dates. So with like the road systems as well, like it's still unclear, like, oh, were these contemporaneous with these above ground sites? What was built first? You know, chicken and egg situation. So there's that one issue. Based on oral histories and going off with local community knowledge, I would be fairly confident to say that a lot of these road systems, were in use before the Inca period, and the Inca just came after and just were using what was already there. But it's still just this issue of of this temporality. Toward the map. So at this point, I'm still in the process of conducting, visual analysis of different sites and then trying to see the larger scale patterns. I would for one of my presentations in 2019, I did this analysis and I did a poster on that. And what I was starting to find was this pattern where you have the burial towers that are on mountain slopes and they are more visible. And then you have cliff tombs that are in these cliff faces, and then they are less visible from households. But me knowing my time on the ground and spending time there as well is that I don't know if that pattern's actually going to keep. There always seems to be a couple sites that don't fit completely into that pattern as well. So I think it'll be a matter of repeating these kind of analysis and seeing if these categories hold up with burial towers versus cliff tombs versus sarcophagi. But one final response to your question that I wanted to talk about that's very interesting is you talked about visibility of the mortuary sites, but also visibility from. And so this is with the drone flights that brings up an interesting methodology where you can start to use the drone to actually take pictures and model what the viewscape would have been from the tomb itself. And that would have been the view of the ancestors, right? And so this is what I didn't get chance into talking much today, but throughout the indigenous Andes, there's this very powerful relationship between the dead and the living, right? It's not so much as we know in the Euro-American context, where when you die, that's it, you're done, you're in the ground, and we have memorials. But in the case of the indigenous Andes, it's a much more drawn out process, and the dead are never really dead, if that makes sense. You continuously engage with the dead, and the dead still have power and are able to interact with people on a day-to-day basis. So in the Inca context, this looked like the Inca mummy bundles would actually be brought out for ceremonial feastings. They were able to control and decide marriages, control land, have control of animals, administer agricultural land as well. So the dead are still powerful beings. And it's not clear what it looks like exactly in the Chachapoya context, but what we're seeing with these above ground sites is that the dead definitely had a huge presence on the landscape. And looking at these viewshed analysis, which maybe start to understand what that relationship was looking like between ancestors, the ancestral dead, and descendant and the communities. And so with the case of viewing from the tombs, that's a kind of a powerful analysis where we're flipping things around and we're really using an indigenous and Dame approach to understand the past, right? We're looking at agency and power that's not just with living people, but also with people with ancestors. And that, so that's definitely a very exciting part of your question. And I'm glad you asked that because it gives me space to talk a bit more about the significance of above ground tombs and their position on the landscape. So thank you for that.
That's awesome. To follow up is just, what I did sort of not hear as much as sort of your theoretical underpinning. And I wonder, with so much work with Tim Earle and the political economy approach, it seems that you're touching on a lot of topics that we see in the Pacific and in sort of Mississippian groups with their mounds, this idea of how the elite really control this visual scape. And it's a way that they can promote cultural hegemony. It's a way that they can have tribute. It's a way that they, as you're saying, the ancestors are still there. They're still directing society. So I wonder if, you could sort of tail in a little bit of what's known in political economy about the control of visual scapes and then the overall movement of cultural evolution. But I think you're onto something very, very excellent. I congratulate you for your work.
Thank you. Yeah, and maybe just one last thing on that is there has been some studies similar to that in the Huánuco region, which I showed the pictures of just a little bit further, which is in the Rapayan Valley, where they're looking at chulpas or these above ground mortuary sites in relation to like a political economy lens, and where maybe these sites would have been boundary markers or delineating the territory of particular cultural groups. And we could, that's one thing to test for in the case of burial towers where they're located near agricultural terraces. And there's also the flip side as well, where there's ethnographic evidence that shows that, at least in Quechua communities, burial towers would have been placed specifically within agricultural fields for fertility purposes. So there's the belief system where there's this rejuvenating energy coming from these places of dead that would have been part of this agricultural cycle. So there's the political economy lens as well as other takes on that as well, with delineating boundaries in burial practices. So thank you for that. Any other questions?
A comment you were bringing up about this incredibly different worldview that Andean people had about the dead. And I remember reading Brian Bauer talk about the Inca mummies and how the Spanish were afraid of the mummies, that they had political power, even though these were dead people. They went through the trouble of capturing these mummies, and where they ended up, you know, is a mystery. He was investigating where they actually ended up. But yeah, these mummies, they could make war on each other, and they would rule lands. The kings, Inca kings, would, from what I understand, would rule the territory they conquered. So then the next king had to conquer new territory because their mummy was still in charge of the territory they had acquired. So they had to keep expanding. Very different view than Western society.
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up an excellent point about the targeting of these sites and of these mummies by the Spanish. And it allows us to kind of do this analysis where if we start to like read against the grain. So you think about, okay, even though now we don't have, it's difficult to find the evidence for the stuff or for mummies, why then were Spanish targeting them so much, right? Why was there such a focus on that? So if we read against the grain, even though the Spanish goal was to wipe out all this information and wipe out this cultural heritage, if we think about it the opposite way, why are they so focused on that, right? So there's obviously a very powerful set of practices associated with those mummy bundles that the Spanish were targeting in order to control and deal with Andean communities. So it goes back to this, long history of these different and complex worldviews when it comes to dealing with the ancestral dead in the indigenous Andes. So, and this is, as you referenced here, it's the Inca context, the Chachapoya context, and it spans millennia into the past, thousands of years of these types of ideologies being very important to indigenous Andean communities.
It seems like the Spanish wanted to replace these mummies with saints. So
Yes.
they would use images of saints to take the places of these mummies in festivals.
Yes. So like I showed with the picture of the Raimi Pampa Festival, which is in Limebamba. So this happens every July. It's part of the Virgen del Carmen annual festival. So the Virgen Carmen, the Virgin of Carmen. So the Carmen Virgin, that's the saint, or that's the figure of Limebamba. And there's a lot of discussion or research that has been done showing how indigenous Andean communities managed to hide their traditional practices within those of Catholicism in order to continue to practice them. So what we're seeing here is like during the Virgin of Carmen Festival, the Virgin gets paraded around, similar to what would have been done in pre-colonial times with parading around the mummy bundle. And this happens in July or just after June, June is Inti Raymi, the sun festival month, around the solstice as well. And each community has, their patron saint or their virgin as well. And the thought is that these were then traditions that communities managed to, navigate and maintain their traditional Andean practices, but within Catholicism. So we see the syncretism happening between indigenous Andean practices, and then Catholicism. And like you said, it's a way to kind of read resistance into indigenous Andean practices. And that, you know, Catholicism didn't just wipe everything out. Actually, people were finding new ways to express their traditional practices.
Am I wrong in thinking that the Chachapoya region, there may be a little bit more protective of their sites? Because I know in other areas of Peru, you have this tradition of the huaqueros, of tomb robbing, whereas people not seeing how valuable these artifacts are to their tradition, to their heritage, to tourism. They dig in the ground and see what they can sell on the black market. Is Chachapoya maybe more protective and seeing the bigger picture here than other parts of Peru?
So unfortunately, I didn't really reference it too much, but unfortunately looting and huaqueros still occur in most of the sites. And with, like, for example, the case of Laguna de los Condores, the site that I mentioned at the very beginning, where the 219 mummy bundles came from, that was originally, recovered by or uncovered by ranchers, and they were uncovering it for the purpose of looting it. Unfortunately, they had a quipu, and they bleached the quipu, and there's a couple other artifacts that they were dealing with and trying to sell off. But then, because they were trying to sell these artifacts, word got out in Limebamba about this happening, and very quickly after, other people in the community and authorities came in and put a stop to it. But looting still occurs, and especially during, actually, in the next couple of weeks is usually the time where it occurs. So it occurs during the Easter weekend and Semana Santa, the Holy Week, because it's believed that it's during this time of year that sites will present themselves, or the gold will come out. And so there's kind of this cycle that happens with looting. So it still happens even on a yearly basis. And even when I was there in 2019, I also do a lot of work, or I assist with tour guides doing long distance treks, helping with translation. And on one of these treks, someone from Uchucmarca came up and was trying to sell an object to one of the trekkers. They saw a bunch of white guys and they were like, "Oh, time to make a buck," So they came out with a bunch of artifacts. And so unfortunately it still occurs. What I would agree, though, is that there definitely is a strong sentiment of preserving cultural heritage, and that's becoming more and more prominent. And overall, most people now, if you engage in looting, you're very quickly condemned by the community. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mentioned this at one of our previous meetings when my wife and I were in Paracas. We were taken to a Paracas cemetery, and we thought we were going to some official site, but it was very unofficial. I was afraid we were going to get robbed or something. But no, the guy was just showing us a site that had been looted, and he's like, "Hey, anything you want to take, just go for it." Baby skulls and textiles, and I'm like, "What?" I was shocked. But yeah, it seems that's still going on in this day and age. I prefer to just buy locally made replicas. I still have my little.
Oh yeah, so you have the sarcophagi as well, yeah.
Yeah. I support the local community. Got my souvenir, and didn't hurt anybody in the process.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's so. In at least, in other areas, so there's the textiles you can buy, and there's community organizations where they bring together like a co-op of women who are doing the textiles, and it promotes, the preservation of that cultural heritage. And then you can buy some amazing textiles for your table, bags, and also, as you showed there, wooden artifacts or wooden carved figures, ceramics in Huancas, you can buy ceramics. So there's definitely a whole way to get your souvenir and still support the local community, and also promote that preservation and maintenance of their cultural heritage.
Yeah, one of the things we found on our journey was a manta, like a blanket, and the design goes back to colonial times as an image of Tupac Amaru being torn apart by horses. You weren't allowed to tell the story, so they would put the story into the fabric.
Yes, yes,
yeah.
and very true. Yeah, and that's the amazing thing with Andean textiles is that there's so much knowledge that's woven in, and stories and designs as well, and even just with the design of doing the textiles as well, as there's so much information that you can find from it. Great. Are there any other questions for me today? If not, you're welcome to email me, reach out to me, and I'm very happy to chat more about my research and share more information if you would
Well,
like.
this is a hugely fascinating subject. I certainly want to hear more. And I mentioned in the chat, you were talking about Jean Savoy. People in your position have so much to deal with this legacy. We talk about the Huaqueros, the people, the tomb robbers and foreigners going in there and also looting and bringing out bad information. Jean Savoy is a fascinating character on his own, kind of a cult leader, a flim-flam hustler. I remember reading something that he married a series of rich Peruvian women. Yeah, weird stuff. This legacy of some bad work that you have to kind of correct. Even Hiram Bingham, which people didn't want to criticize him for many years, his stuff turned out to be, how should I say, not accurate. Machu Picchu is a beautiful place, but it wasn't the last holdout of the Incas. And his research talking about the sacrifice of the virgins was also not correct. So I mean, you have a lot of work ahead of you, correcting a lot of bad information that's come out over the years.
Yeah, Jean Savoy is definitely a funny character. Yeah, you're right. He's a cult leader. He established his own kind of church, which is like the Second-day Adventist church. And he was somehow tying his archaeological interests to biblical ones. But yeah, it looks like the church is still existing in Reno, Nevada. So if you're ever in Reno, you can check it out. But if you look at his website and stuff, it says like, yeah, they have stuff left over from his travels and things like that. So I am curious to see if maybe if they still have his, a lot of the artifacts and stuff that he maybe took. If maybe in the long term, it would be interesting to repatriate that and bring it back to Leimibamba. So a long-term project, work ahead for sure.
Yeah, according to his teachings, I think he believed himself to be immortal, but I think he died like maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah, he died in like 2007 or something like that. Yeah, I did not know that he had that belief.
Yes, something about getting the power of the sun that regenerated you. He looked good for his age, so people thought that he wasn't aging, he wasn't getting any older because he had the power of the sun going through him.
Wow,
but looked like it didn't work out.
Yeah, no, but I don't think so. Yeah, he's long gone now.
But it certainly shows you, even an amateur that was just kind of wandering around Peru. There's a huge amount of stuff there. It's just fascinating. Everywhere you go, there's the possibility of ancient civilization. For
sure, yeah. There's a lot, very rich cultural heritage. Throughout it, and thousands and thousands of years of existence here, for sure. Yeah. Well,
thank you so much for your talk today. And I want to remind everybody that next month, April 24th at 3:30, come over to the Evanston Public Library at the Community Meeting Room, and or come visit us on Zoom. We'll be sharing the link. Hope to see you there in person or online. Thank you so much, Daniela, and I hope that you keep in touch and let us know about your wonderful work and research.
For sure. Thank you again to everyone for tuning in and for this invitation. And feel free to reach out to me too if you are interested in respectful travel to the Chachapoya region and you want to see the place for yourself. I'm happy to provide you with links and resources for respectful travel to the area. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.